Because knowing Ram's company, Asia Mobiliti, whether is there any bias or not, because you know someone, so it's easier for you to seek an audience. People will always use the nepotism of the story to label you. So maybe you've done well because your husband or your wife or your sibling or your father or mother is who. Hello everyone, welcome back to Are We Okay, the show that talks about public policy that in a way that relates to the layman, to the people in the street. My name is Peter or Mr. Money.
And I'm Botak Man or OK Man or OKM.
We're going to bring together an episode today that's quite interesting because a lot has happened once again. It seems like Malaysia got a lot of drama. This time round, DRT lah, then BUDI lah.
Peter, if you don't have drama, then we don't have a show already.
That's true as well, yeah.
Yeah, so, we have to have things to talk about, so that people like us and also people like Kyrie and Shariel on their Keluar Sekejap show got things to discuss, analyze, and also to bring you guys back behind the curtain. Before we go into the hot topics, I just wanted to read out this comment that was based on the last episode. This guy called Vimal Raj KR. Hope you had a good time in Queensland, Dr. Ong. He said, I propose you look at the airport industry in the antipodes as an excellent case study for Malaysia to replicate. This is in Australia. Interesting that you brought up the expansion work for the Brisbane Airport or BNE. They're expanding their domestic terminal and to ensure that the infrastructure can take the burden. I think the way they manage the passenger load here is quite remarkable. He also talks about how he really wants this MAHB deal to go through because this private equity firm called GIP has done a tremendous job, according to him, with the Sydney airport. He believes that they have the know-how to transform not just KLIA but all of the MAHB airport. He says, first ever flight was from Kuala Lumpur to Sydney. I can attest that Sydney, the international airport, has improved tremendously over the past 15 years. The Australian airport privatization model is the way forward. Many studies out there for those interested to research. And then currently, the central government is building Sydney's second international airport. Right, so from his perspective, GIP seems to have done a good job in facilitating the process of expansion and also service delivery in one particular airport, which is Sydney. We're going to talk about the MAHB issue later on as our concluding segment. But yeah, I thought I'd just bring that up and shout out to Vimal for his comment. So the first issue we're going to talk about is the DRT Asia Mobiliti contract. Peter, can I ask you, before this issue came out, or were you aware of something called demand responsive transit?
I only found out about it when I start seeing many vans in the street.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I was wondering, what van is this? Only then I realized that there's such thing. Follow-up to that was YB Obin did a video and she talked about that. Then only I found that there's such thing.
So the vans, when you saw them and when Bean was promoting these vans, who were they operated by?
I wasn't sure at the point.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I was thinking
no
how
brand
come no one knows about it? One?
Yeah, so it's like just some random marketing or advertising.
Yeah. I was thinking like, what is this all about? How I never hear before one?
Have you seen sort of like these vans that are operated by a company called Kumpul, Kumpol? Have you seen them around before?
No.
I'll talk about them later because they were one of the pioneers in the demand responsive transit services. And basically this is a category of transport operators that focuses on vans and larger vehicles. Not your passenger vehicles like Grab and Asia Rides, but larger vehicles that can pick up more than 4 passengers. The purpose of their existence is to solve the last mile connectivity issues. Basically, going to the taman-tamans that don't have direct bus service and getting people used to the fact that they can come and collect people at certain times, bring them to, for example, shopping malls or bring them to LRT or MRT stations to like solve that last mile connectivity issue.
Yeah, so I've seen it around, that kind, but I didn't know that it's like so well organized, like there is a particular company behind. But I've heard of it, I've seen it, but I always thought it's a very individual effort or part of the operation by those, let's say, the shopping malls' responsibility.
Well, they have, shopping malls have their shuttle buses. Even those who, there are vans that operate to pick up school children, for example, to take them to schools. Those are services that are already in existence, following certain regular routes. But the difference between those and demand responsive transit is, as and when there's demand, then only they are deployed. So basically like a Grab, but for larger vehicles taking more passengers.
Yep.
So I think the controversy here is the fact that this proof of concept pilot project was awarded by the Selangor state government to 2 companies. One is called Asia Mobiliti. The other one is called Badan Bus or BADAN BUS. This contract was actually awarded publicly in October And I was there in the same building because this was as part and parcel of the Selangor Business Summit. Although I didn't witness the actual ceremony itself, I saw the news. I knew at least of the people behind Asia Mobiliti. And this is the subject of controversy because the co-founders of Asia Mobiliti is Ram. I know him as Ram, who also happens to be Hannah Yeo's husband.
Yep.
From your perspective as an outsider, when you hear about this news, that this proof of concept pilot project was awarded to two companies, one of which co-founder is the husband of a minister, what was your initial impression?
Definitely, it will not feel good, at least initial. But for me, it's a bit complicated because I've seen Ram around in some of those events in MDAC and so on. And the way that he involved just like anyone else, it's not like he come out of the blue.
And it's not as if he got any special treatment.
Yeah. That's how I felt when I went to many of those MDAC events and so on when I see him there. And then subsequently also, when I read up a little bit more about it, like you say, it was a public award. He never shy away from it. He never hide behind the scenes. So when I gather all these facts, then I was quite okay with it. But definitely, if I do not know anything, the optics will not look good lah.
Okay. I've known Ram for some time already. I've always known him as not just Hannah's husband, but somebody who is involved in the business intelligence, meaning software, and also that kind of larger tech and startup ecosystem. So when he was in the MDAC ecosystem, it was in the context of him being an entrepreneur. So that's just to set the scene. It's not as if he suddenly came out of the blue and got this contract. So remember that in this context. And yes, you talk about the optics. It's something that I think many people are aware of. And, their gut reaction may be similar to what you experience. And many of them probably wouldn't have the experience of you seeing Ram go to all these tech conferences and things of that nature. A follow-up question. If let's say you were the Selangor state government, and of course, you're awarding this contract to a company that is co-founded by the husband of the former Selangor speaker, would you have sort of like highlighted it right from the start?
Oh yes, immediately. I think before I even give, they apply, I will highlight it. Okay. One of the applicants.
So to make it clear to everyone, so that it's as if you really don't have anything to hide.
Yeah. Well, I made it clear from the start.
Yeah. And then you would have used that opportunity also to answer whatever questions, and then you can control the narrative.
Yeah,
right?
and that's me as a media person now, obviously.
Yeah. Okay, so if you were Ram as the entrepreneur, put your entrepreneur hat on. There was a possibility of you pitching and then maybe after that getting contract that's awarded by the Selangor state government. Whether it's open tender or whether it's, through separate kind of bidding process, right? Would you have had any concerns bidding for such a contract?
Definitely. There will be a lot of concerns. There will be a lot of conversation with my partner, if let's say I'm in his position. Because you definitely know what's to come, right? If let's say people to scrutinize it. But will I still apply for it? If I'm in his position, running the exact same thing, why not? Because this is the place where you can really put your software to test. Because public transport, where's more mature than Selangor? So there's the best testing ground.
And Selangor and the Klang Valley is also a very natural place for you to test out whether your service or whether your solution can solve those last mile problems that I talked about just now.
That's right, yeah.
Right.
So it's just that maybe we'll be extra careful and probably make some sort of a public statement from the start itself.
Those three questions from a more layman standpoint, I think you've answered them very well. But from a public policy and transparency perspective, let me sort of like share my thoughts in terms of what can be done moving forward. And maybe some of these things could have been done, even in anticipation of the fact that this narrative could have gone out of control the way it has. So on the part of the Selangor state government, I think if let's say right from the start, the Selangor state government under the leadership of Ng Zihan, he's together with me in the Selangor DAP state committee. He's the secretary and the treasurer, and he's also in charge of mobility. He really tries to work very hard and do the right thing. But it would have been helpful to his portfolio if right from the start, or even now, disclose the details of the proof of concept.
Yep.
So, this is the DRT contract. These are the KPIs that both of these companies have to fulfill. These are the routes that they have been allocated because the proof of concept is based on specific routes that they have discussed already. Because there's potential for you to solve that last mile connectivity, maybe trying to connect places with a lot of students to LRT or MRT stations where the connectivity is not very good, right? So for example, like from going from Taylor's University to one of the LRT stations in Subang Jaya, or the KTM station in Subang Jaya, for example. So disclose that information and those KPIs. And then also, I think it will be good, given the fact that the pilot has been going on for some time already, since it was awarded in October, right now is May. Is it possible for the Selangor state government to actually disclose some of the data relating to some of these routes? Right? To show that actually these companies have actually started serving the public, and these are the riderships that they have gotten. And in fact, according to this is Asia Mobility's own press statement, it says that across the 5 zones which we operate, 4 of which are in Selangor for the Selangor Mobility Project, which began in November 2023, we are on track to achieve a record high of 14,000 ridership this month. That's in May 2024. Right, so why not disclose that information? I were advising the Selangor state government, I would want to disclose the figures for Asia Mobility as well as the other company.
That's right.
To compare. Right? If let's say Asia Mobility's numbers are much better than the other company, then at least they could say, hey, look, this company is doing well, at least by those standards. Maybe whether or not they've reached their KPI according to the proof of contract, we don't know. It may be a bit lower, and if that's the case, then there should be some things that Asia Mobility can do more to promote their services. So do you think that seems like a reasonable thing to ask the Selangor state government to do?
Yeah, I think in fact most of the government contracts should be like that. I find it hard to find out what are the KPIs measured in every single contract that the Selangor government has given out, or any government per se. I heard that there are certain countries where they actually allow a download of the copy of most of those things.
Yeah, so if let's say there can be an agreement between the government, whether it's state or federal, together with the private entities to say that, look, this is something that is quite public facing, and especially given the fact that one of the co-founders is a husband of a minister, right? Why not disclose this information right from the start?
Yeah.
And in fact, the Selangor MB has come out to say that, look, if the public wants access to the contract details, they can have it because Selangor has a Freedom of Information Act. Rather than relying on people to file an appeal to get the information through the Freedom of Information Act, why not just disclose it?
It should be available download for all the contracts, including like all the tree planting around and those kind of stuff, right? Yeah, how many trees, what are the species that are supposed to be there, yeah.
It's not just the Selangor state government that I think should be a bit more transparent, but I think the federal government and some of the companies or agencies within that ecosystem should also come out to explain a few things. So for example, the Selangor state government has said that both Asia Mobility and Badan Bus were awarded licenses for these kinds of proof of concept for the demand responsive transit for buses and vans, and that is one of the reasons why they gave this proof of concept to these companies. I think it would be helpful if, let's say, the agency in charge of giving these licenses, which is APAD under the Ministry of Transport. This is after SPAD was reabsorbed back into the Ministry of Transport. If let's say they could give some clarification as to how these two companies were given these licenses, show some documents in terms of how they managed to successfully pass certain hurdles, certain conditions to get this provisional or this license, and maybe even fulfill my own curiosity because for me, this Kumpul service that I talked about just now, right? They were the pioneers. Some of them actually worked together with the Aduns and the MPs from PJ and other high population density areas to roll out this kind of DRT service, right? So why wasn't Kumpul involved, or why weren't they given a license? And perhaps linking it to the discussion with the Selangor state government as well, because if let's say people were to ask, hey, I've seen Kumpul vans around, why weren't they given a chance? Then APAC would say, hey, actually at that point in time they didn't have a license to operate in Klang Valley. They were operating other places in Penang and in Johor, and that's why only these two companies who had passed those conditions were given that license. Then at least it would seem a little bit more reasonable, right?
Yeah. You need to put out all the reasons why this company was awarded.
Correct. And let me sort of bring out another point. In Asia Mobility's press statement, it also says that the success of the Selangor Mobility Program has also led Prasarana and the Ministry of Transport announcing the adoption of DRT as a replacement for conventional feeder bus services, with Rapid KL running a wildly successful pilot in May 2023 with Track Rides. This is the app that is under Asia Mobility in Bangsa South, which we continue to operate independently. Right? So if let's say they are operating this independently, then there should be ways in which that data can be shared as well. Right? And going back to the public sharing of this kind of data, I like to go to this website called data.gov.my. And in that website, they have daily ridership data for the LRT and the MRT sort of like a ridership station to station. Right? So this is public API data, meaning that this data is extracted from Prasarana sources automatically and populated in the data.gov.my website through this kind of public API ecosystem. If let's say Asia Mobility were willing to share their data in this way, having a public API for their data extraction in terms of ridership to be put on data.gov.my, then everyone can see.
Yeah.
Right? And
it becomes more transparent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if let's say they can do it independently, that would be one way in which they can sort of like perhaps answer their critics. But for the Selangor state government, you could latch onto that ecosystem and say, look, now that there's so much scrutiny, let's work or request for Asia Mobility and Badan Bus to upload your information through public APIs on data.gov.my so everyone can see, whether it's journalists, NGOs, others who are interested in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
So the reason why this kind of thing needs to be transparent now more than ever, right, is because these two companies are still undergoing the proof of concept. Imagine if, let's say, all this information was not disclosed, and after the proof of concept, the contract is awarded to Asia Mobility.
Oh, it will look even worse, man.
Correct. And if, let's say, after this proof of concept, because of political pressure, even if, let's say, Asia Mobility were performing better than the other company is awarded. It won't be fair to them as well.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one of the ways out, seeing forward and trying to understand the larger ecosystem, the public demands for all these kinds of things, right? The best thing to do is greater transparency. Right? So, I hope that people who are listening, including my friends in the Ministry of Transport, in the Selangor State Government, even in Asia Mobility, and I will try to convey these messages, privately as well to the people there. Hopefully this would be constructive inputs that they can listen to. All this stuff was revealed by a random person on Twitter. If, let's say, the opposition was really doing their role of check and balance, whether it's the opposition in the Selangor state government or check and balance opposition within the unity government in the form of MCA, for example, if they had done their proper homework, monitored this kind of news and all this kind of policy areas, including public transportation, they would have been able to highlight this.
It earlier.
And even now, I mean, if any of you guys are listening, Dr. Afif, for example, who's Adun in Taman Medan from Bersatu, instead of just asking this contract to be cancelled, look at the root cause of trying to solve the last mile connectivity. Go and download the Track Rights app. Go and test out the service offerings that's being provided by Asia Mobility as well as Badan Bus. And then based on your experience, go and critique and give constructive criticism. And also the journalists who have covered this news before, who would have known that this could be a potential news story of interest, of public interest, you also should do your job in terms of going out to cover and give more in-depth coverage rather than just to rely on statements that are coming out from the relevant stakeholders, state government, federal government. Go and test out the service itself and see what comments you have and interview some of the users, for example, in some of the areas that both of these companies are serving in those routes, right? Then that would be really a public service from a public policy perspective.
Yeah.
Right?
So when it comes to this particular topic, right, as a layman myself, I do have quite a lot of questions, right? So before we end this particular part, so there are just a few questions. The first thing is that why does many of these government contract that is not like high-level security kind of stuff is not disclosed without request? And in fact, it's already considered quite advanced that Selangor state government say you're allowed to request. But in the past, it's not even imaginable for us to request for this. Why is it like that? And this comes down to a lot of issues. Like, for example, I think the most commonly used example of abuse cases will be planting the trees, right? Yeah, where the species are not exactly according, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. So, yeah, firstly, why is there such issue?
The official reason that would be given by the legal advisor on, whether it's at the state level or the federal level would be, if you expose this, then we may be opening up ourselves to possible lawsuits. If let's say, the company itself, we dispute something with them, or we don't extend their contract because they didn't fulfill certain parts of the contract, then they will be able to use that contract to say, hey, I don't agree with your interpretation of the contract, and other people then would be able to use the public nature of the disclosure to say, actually, yeah, I agree with this company, the state government or the federal government has not fulfilled its end of the bargain. So it becomes something that's very hard for the state government to control from a narrative perspective and even maybe from a legal perspective. So they err on the side of caution. They say, okay, don't need to, then I don't publish it.
Right.
I think times have changed.
Yeah.
And this is something that affects public services. So if that's the case, then especially something like this where you are talking about daily riderships and certain KPIs that need to be met, it's not like even it's much more important than just like planting a tree that will take 20 years to grow,
Yeah.
right? So the importance of actually public disclosure is much greater.
I think they have to change their approach of the law, because the way that they want to control this is pretty much using asymmetrical knowledge.
Yes. Government knows best. Government knows everything, and then the right, just have to take it.
Which doesn't work in the day of age today when we have full access to a lot of information, lah.
And people would give their own thoughts and views, and the narrative can easily run away from you.
Yeah, and either way, if I want to sue you, I'm the party that's receiving a contract. I will have read the contract. My lawyers will have interpreted it, and I will still sue you regardless. So you're not exactly avoiding any problem. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Then the second part of this question is this. Because knowing Rum's company, Asia Mobiliti, they actually did win quite a lot of awards previously as well. Like a lot of those accelerator, this and that. Like I said, they did not come out of the blue. Yeah. So it's kind of like, at least their track record wise, they're legit. Now, whether is there any bias or not, or because you know someone, so it's easier for you to seek an audience, this kind of stuff. You, as someone who's in the political scene before, what do you think about it? Because I try to imagine myself as a person who's close to, let's say, a politician, right? People will always use the nepotism of the story to label you. So like, oh, maybe you've done well because your husband or your wife or your sibling or your father or mother is who. Which you can't entirely avoid that. But should you just discount that person's ability just because this person have access? Because as far as I'm concerned, even today, running a media company, and I don't have any relatives who's in any high position, but probably someone will probably tell me one day that because you have the ability to sit down with Ong Kian Ming on a show, and therefore that's why company give you...
I'm not that influential, thankfully.
But you get what I mean? Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think to avoid any possibility of this kind of speculations, let's say on the part of Asia Mobiliti, it would have been good if they could have proven their concept or taken their proof of concept to other places, whether it's another country or even another state. Right, so I'll give you an example. In October 2022, Asia Mobiliti received funding of up to 5 million ringgit from two companies, DVE Sapta and also Gamlight IT, which is an infrastructure asset management company. And one of the comments that was made by the managing director of Gamlight IT, Aaron Chin, is the following. Right, so he said that we are pleased to join this round of funding, and we are excited about this investment as we look forward to helping Asia Mobiliti grow its wide portfolio of MAAS or Mobility as a Service solutions, specifically in Borneo, bolstered by our footprint and local operations here. Right, so I'm not very familiar with this company, Gamlight IT, but given the fact that they are Borneo based or Sabah based, it would have been interesting to see whether some of the solutions of Asia Mobiliti could have been deployed in Sabah, Sarawak first. Right, then you would have avoided some of this more strong criticism of potential conflicts and whatnot, because especially Sarawak, for example, DAP doesn't have a presence in the state government. right? Whereas for Selangor, the exco in charge of mobility is from the DAP, right? Selangor Hannah used to be Adun in
that's right.
Selangor, and she also used to be the speaker. So I'm not saying that Hannah did anything wrong, and I think any calls for her to resign and all that, I think are premature and irresponsible. To answer your question, to avoid that kind of perception, it would have been good to prove yourself in other places first.
But as an entrepreneur myself, I was thinking of myself, it's like, this is a great opportunity because Selangor, and that's where the most mature system is. It kind of gives me a better portfolio as well.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a scenario. We always like to talk about Singapore, right? Imagine this situation whereby I am Lee Hsien Loong's son, right? And I am an entrepreneur. I want to roll out certain services that are related to, for the sake of argument, public transport, trying to solve this kind of last mile connectivity issue. How do you think the Singapore public would react if, let's say, Lee Hsien Loong's son got a contract from the Singapore government, doing this kind of pilot project or proof of concept project that's awarded by, let's say, the Ministry of Transportation? What would the optics in Singapore have looked like?
It would go bananas.
Of course, some people would say, this one, the conflict of interest is much more real. The Prime Minister and his son, the power is more linked, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But even if, let's say, you say, okay, it can be the Minister of Education's son who got a contract from the Minister of Transport, this kind of proof of concept or pilot project concept. Do you think in Singapore, the people there would have accepted it?
It will still go bananas.
Okay.
Yeah, either way, it's a very difficult landscape to handle, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that answers the question, right? In terms of optics, in terms of what kind of standards you want to have from a transparency perspective.
Yep.
We'll let the readers and our audience decide for themselves. And, please leave your thoughts in the comments. Really like to hear from you on this particular issue. So be right back after this. Welcome back to the Are We OK podcast, the podcast that talks about public policies in ways that are accessible to you. Peter, do you drive a diesel car?
Nope.
Do you know anyone who drives a diesel car?
I know people, but not close to me, who drives a
okay.
diesel car. Mostly business owners.
Oh, business owners. But, depending on whether the car is registered to themselves or
That's
the
right.
company. But I would think that your friends would not be eligible for the BUDI targeted diesel subsidy.
Yep.
But I'm glad that this targeted diesel subsidy has been announced by the Ministry of Finance. It's called BUDI. The announcement was made on the 28th of May that applications are now open for different people to apply for this targeted diesel subsidy. The requirement is that you have to be Malaysian. Household income must be 100,000 or less based on LHDN tax submissions. And then you have to have a diesel car. Yeah, it's for cars only, not eligible for motorcycles. So, we won't go into the applications for those who are in the agriculture business and even the transport and logistic players. We've talked about that previously. When this came out, what I did was I tested out that process by putting in the IC number of my father, who doesn't drive a diesel car. But when I registered the account for my father, what I realized was that you had to put in a number of documents for this BUDI application, namely your JPJ documents to show that you have this kind
Diesel
of diesel vehicle. And I saw from Twitter and a few other places that there may have been other documents that were required for you to upload. So once this became clear, I saw on Twitter questions that arose regarding BUDI and PADU. So why are you laughing? Why are you laughing, Peter?
Because I think this is definitely gonna come. When it came, I was like, sure, datang this one.
Okay.
It should have been solved at the PADU level.
Okay. Because remember, we were asked to fill up all this kind of information on PADU.
That's right.
The Ministry of Economy also announced after the deadline expired on the 31st of March, supplementary information from the other ministries and agencies would be populated into the PADU ecosystem. That amounted to 17 or almost 18 million people's details. And the purpose of that database was to use for targeted subsidies, diesel as well as petrol. So now the question would be, why is it that we need to fill it in again? right? So from your perspective, how would you answer that question?
I would say that this definitely, again, doesn't look good. Yeah, and it clearly shows that it fails to do what it's supposed to be. There's this very big question. So which is the system that really is implementing this thing, right? That's the real thing. Now, nonetheless, I do foresee that there's a chance the argument is going to come by saying that maybe the PADU system is not that flexible. So he did mention that he's going to use other areas of government ways of collecting to, in the end, populate back PADU. So maybe this could be the narrative where we are using BUDI to collect further information, because let's not forget PADU did say that you cannot change your information, right? So maybe I haven't buy a diesel car when PADU was out and I just bought a diesel car. So since I can't change, then, which I don't understand why I can't change, but yeah, you get the drift, right?
Whatever you said just now, right? That was not part of the announcement by the Ministry of Finance, right? They did not mention PADU at all.
Yep.
Okay, so to be honest with you, when this issue came up, I was a bit conflicted on whether to bring this up or not. And the reason is this. For me, the principle should be that the public policy that I'm interested in, that will be helpful to the country for many reasons, gets implemented successfully.
Yep.
And that people can buy in and have confidence in that public policy. So, if the diesel targeted subsidy process needs to be done such that you have to upload a few additional documents, not too onerous, not having the 36 or 39 fields that PADU wanted you to fill, and that the number of people who are driving diesel cars in Peninsular Malaysia who would be eligible for this subsidy is relatively low. By bringing up this connection between BUDI and PADU, my fear is that it would make people less confident about the process of targeted subsidies for petrol. That would be much more serious and bigger. My thinking after the registration for PADU closed was that, okay let's put that aside. When the targeted subsidies roll out, it will be under MOF. And they would use their own mechanisms, and they would refer to the database that's been compiled over the past 10 plus years. Starting from BRIM, now it's called Sumbangan Tunai Rama. And that database would be the basis for diesel subsidies, partly because the LHDN data is in there. And then later on for the petrol subsidies. Yes, there are people who would criticize, why is it that we have to fill up this information again? And I think we have to admit that PADU is a failure. It's a white elephant. We don't know how it's going to be used, if it's going to be used at all. And I think it's a reflection on the fact that we spend a lot of time and effort and also probably lost some trust and also lost some public confidence. But I'm hopeful that this diesel subsidy, targeted subsidy, can be successfully rolled out, leading on to the petrol subsidy.
Yeah.
So you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah. Firstly, I have to say that when it comes to the targeted subsidy part for the diesel, I think it's good to actually implement it. And it's actually great that they actually start with Semenanjung, because the people that are affected are less. But I think more importantly is, yes, there's a part about the collecting of information and everything all. There's also that part where people are less confident about the Ministry of Economy rolling out the system. So it creates this number one question, right? Who am I supposed to listen to first? Right? Is it Ministry of Economy that's going to be implementing this, which originally was the whole idea, and a lot of the narrative came out from the minister himself.
Yeah.
But subsequently, when now it's rolling out, it seems like Ministry of Finance is the one that's taking lead. And the way that they're conveying the message or controlling the narrative is definitely less aggressive. Maybe because of less news coverage, I'm not really sure. However, I think there's also a bigger narrative at the back that's not sure it's part of our agenda I talk about, which I think a lot of people are really concerned about cost of living increase after this, right? And that has been a topic that I kind of addressed within my channel, less of from a policy perspective, but definitely more of a
financial planning
and so on. Yeah, which many of you guys actually sometimes highlight, right? Conversation between me and Kian Ming. I'm not the policy guy here. I'm just a man on the street that's asking the question that generally arise. Yeah. So I think this is the part that needs to be really addressed among the people. Because when it comes to many of the T20s and M40s, I will have to say that many of them are not too concerned. And in fact, I've spoken to many and they actually agree that this is necessary.
Yeah, so they would not be concerned because right now the diesel fuel increase hasn't really hit them yet. Anyway, those who will be affected, relatively small number of people, right? But the one of the key challenges and also key questions on my part is the role that the Ministry of Finance and the Minister of Finance too will take moving forward with regards to the petrol targeted subsidies. Because for diesel, right, the second finance minister may not have wanted to go out and have a press conference because then journalists may have asked him about PADU and things that may be difficult for him to answer. But the fact of the matter is that for the petrol targeted subsidies, right, like it or not, you will have to answer questions about it publicly. Definitely in Parliament, you would definitely have to answer it. But when this is rolled out, it's going to affect a lot more people in Peninsular Malaysia. And the kind of possible backlash will also be much greater. So it will be interesting to see whether the MOF continues to have this kind of approach where they just release a press statement and then if they need to answer any additional questions, they may have a clarification statement on Twitter or somewhere else, But to me, a better way of doing this would be to grab the bull by its horns, control the narrative, go out, speak to Bernama, speak to BFM, speak to different press. May not just be the second finance minister. It may be the economic advisor to the prime minister. We talked about him before. It may be the Treasury Secretary General, Dato Johan Marikan. So at least then that narrative gets amplified, gets explained. You can chop them up into different clips that you can put on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I think they are doing not bad of a job up to date lah, I have to say. Yeah, I think it's the only complication is where does PADU stand? And remind me again how much they spend on PADU?
I don't know. Maybe there's a parliamentary question that somebody will take. So you have been seeing some of the social media kind of communication on the part of MOF and others on this diesel subsidy?
Yes, the last episode that we talked about, they went on Bernama, they went on a certain different, I think a few podcasts as well, right? Yeah, and so on. And I do see bits and pieces of it being distributed, like quotes and all. And in fact, I hear that there are some individual effort as well to actually even explain certain policy, but at the more general side, to even explain certain policy to certain people in a closed door manner or communities.
So it would be good if, let's say, that kind of communication can be more public, especially on the details, because the details means who can apply, what kind of documents you need to upload, those kinds of things that are a bit more remit-teme. You have to follow up after you give the general explanation.
And in fact, I think one of the things that was good in this is that this one actually does help the M40 as well. Yeah. It's
the
not
200
just,
ringgit lah.
Yeah, and the fact that, like, how do we say it? We always feel that M40 is being left behind, right? This is probably the best chance to actually tell that, hey, we remember you guys, Yeah.
So the calculation that that was given was if let's say you're eligible, you get 200 ringgit, per month, will definitely help you pump diesel for probably 2 tanks. Yeah. Which is not insignificant. Yeah. So I mean, we'll wait to see what will happen for the, maybe BUDI 2.0 on the petrol subsidies, and it will be a space that many people will watch very, very carefully. Let's go to the next segment, semiconductors.
Oh, yeah.
Semiconductors, I think, is a very sexy topic. This is something that Prime Minister Anwar announced at the opening of Semiconductor Conference, Southeast Asia in MITEC. And I was there on the second day. I'll speak a bit more about that. And it really captured the international headlines because now semiconductors are the new oil, right? So everyone is trying to grab a piece of the supply chain. And the announcement that he made as part and parcel of the National Semiconductor Strategy, or NSS, that's under MITI, included 25 billion ringgit over, I think, a span of 10 years to be invested to attract semiconductor investments in Malaysia. 60,000 engineers trained, I think, over the same period of time. Also, efforts to attract as much as 500 billion worth of investments in this space. So when you read all these big gaudy numbers and all that, what is your response? What is your reaction?
Finally, it's something not a data center. Finally, it's something that is truly gonna add a little bit more value, and it kind of reminds me of how Taiwan became Taiwan, right? Where they started off by helping with the manufacture of semiconductor and all the skill transfer and everything, which gave them the edge of building TSMC.
Yep.
And it makes me feel that Malaysia has the high potential of following that footstep. Being near to Singapore and many countries, many big international companies like to put their headquarters there.
Yep.
They can place their designers there and then skill transfer to Malaysia, which is definitely higher value. It's just way higher value.
Yeah, so I'm privy to a lot more sort of like in-depth conversations on this space because of my former position as Deputy Minister of MITI, and even currently as a MAHB board member talking to the semiconductor guys. And yesterday, so happened that I was in a panel as part of this conference talking about Malaysia's role in the E&E or semiconductor value chain. And during this, panel session, I also gave a short speech where I emphasized three things. I knew about the announcement already. I got the press release from MITI, and I said, look, great start. You get a lot of international publicity, especially when the whole world is actually looking at this part of the world, Malaysia, Singapore, for the semiconductor supply chain. In fact, I was interviewed on this particular issue by BBC a couple of days ago as well to show, and this is to show the interest that that the international media has on Malaysia. So I brought up three things. I said, firstly, given this bold ambitious plan, we should try to attract TSMC and its ecosystem to Malaysia.
Yeah.
It's a big bet. We may not succeed.
But there's chance.
Yes, there's chance. Of course, at the same time, we also have to acknowledge all the existing semiconductor players in our country that has invested and will continue to invest in Infineon, Intel, others in the cloud space. But TSMC is sort of like the holy grail, right? So that's one. Second thing is, we must not only focus on semiconductor investments, and although there are certain specialities in that space, such as IC design, advanced packaging, specialty chemicals that Malaysia can invest more on. We also need to look at how to deploy some of this semiconductor power in the Malaysian and regional ecosystem. Right. So what do I mean by this? We are top 3 in the world in terms of producing solar PVs. But most of us, in fact, over 99% of our solar PVs that are produced here by the multinationals are exported outside. So we don't really get to benefit from the deployment of those solar panels, mostly because of a pricing issue. I'm not saying that we should use all those semiconductors in Malaysia. That would be impossible. But if we are going to be building high-end chips, we are going to get data centers to be deployed in Malaysia, we should have some of that processing power deployed in the region in Malaysia. And the reason why I made this argument was because if we can see the deployment of those use cases, right, semiconductors or silicon, as I call it, can become sexy again, right? Because if you remember, Silicon Valley, the original name of Silicon Valley, right, was inspired not by startups in the tech, in the sort of like startup VC space that we see now, but it was by people like Hewlett Packard, people who built Stanford, the E&E and semiconductor guys. That's why Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, because you use the silicon. Exactly. And then because of the ecosystem, it developed, pool of capital grew. That's when the startup in the fintech and other services space came. Your Ubers and your Lyfts and others that are occupying the ecosystem, Twitter and whatnot.
That's right.
And as a result of that innovation, Lam Research and others, then they fed back that capital into the semiconductor space. Talent, R&D, deployment of Tesla, for example, right? Then it becomes a virtuous cycle. Whereas in Malaysia, if let's say semiconductor is just the hardware part, it doesn't go down to the software part, it doesn't go down to the deployment, then people would think about the semiconductor space would be, they're all just a bunch of nerds. Right? So Another example I gave was NVIDIA. NVIDIA, can you remember what it was originally known for?
GPU.
Yes. Graphic processing units, right? GPU chips.
Gamers all knows NVIDIA at that point.
Yes. And when I played PC games, I always suffered lag because I didn't get NVIDIA graphic cards, right? Because they are the top end.
That's right.
It was only later, in that process when Jensen Huang or people in the ecosystem realized that the kind of simultaneous processing of your graphic rendering, right, could be used for other applications. And suddenly generative AI popped up.
Yep.
This is the same kind of similar processes that you use to feed your large language models.
Yep.
To do that simultaneous processing rather than your logic sequential processing.
Yep.
Right. So why not get our Dota players, interested in this kind of semiconductor deployment space to say that, hey, if you not only play Dota, but if you or others in the ecosystem can come in to think about how you can be part of the chip design process so that you can influence the kind of games that can be built in the future. You can influence the kind of animation that you want to be that can be created as a result of these state-of-the-art chips. Then suddenly silicon and semiconductors become much more sexy, right? Right? And you'll be able to attract more people, more talent, more interest in this particular ecosystem.
Yeah. So what you mentioned just now, definitely, I think that there has to be some sort of a trickle down into the public space, and in terms of application, because people don't appreciate it until we can use it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But at a policy level, what can be done? Because as an entrepreneur myself, or as a business person and a public person myself, all I can think of, honestly, is just if, let's say, for example, they were to come up with some, they have the chips here designed, maybe for local startups can sort of apply for some sort of a grant where you get the power at a slightly discounted price. It's kind of like Amazon Web Service. They would give out free vouchers for startups, 10,000 a year to get you kickstart to use their
cloud.
system, use their cloud, right? That's something that's very common. So aside from that, is there any more? I
know where you're coming from. So that's where the creativity and the innovation comes into that space. Government must think, put themselves in the shoes of the private sector, for example, to say that, hey, we not only want to have an attractive ecosystem for you to build your chips and do the R&D to build better chips and also the component parts, but we also want to encourage use applications. Whether it's in smart manufacturing, whether it's in autonomous electric vehicles driving and testing, whether it's in gaming, whether it's in 5G deployment, create that kind of ecosystem where the private sector can invest, can deploy, can test. And this is where we'll be able to see a lot more entrepreneurs being able to take advantage of that kind of policy catalyst. And the final point that I made, remember I made 3 points. Firstly is, get somebody like TSMC, to be part of the investment ecosystem, get them to come in. Second one is the deployment of the capabilities. The third point is we should not do it alone. The point I made was that we should do this together with Singapore as part of the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone. Because we need to put something on the table anyways. And Singapore, they are part and parcel of the semiconductor supply chain as well, probably more on the high-end side. And they are looking for use cases to deploy. They have a lot of capital from their PE and VC funds, from their home offices, and they have good talent as well. Many of them from Malaysia, right? So, and also many from other parts of the world and the region. Why not work together on these two things? Pitch for TSMC and the ecosystem, have a joint investment fund, and then also pitch or deploy use cases in Johor Bahru to start with, or Johor to start with, as part of the SEZ. So you can see this kind of trickle-down effect or economic multiplier that I think can really, propel the economy forward.
So I was thinking about it, right? Actually, I think one of the ways that can really trickle down is actually having some sort of a sandbox in Johor SEZ area, right? Which you have mentioned in quite a few episodes before, right?
Yes, correct.
And this is like, wow, if you can have some sort of a sandbox where entrepreneurs can have some sort of access, And because it's being produced here, yeah. So and
Sandbox
this should
as a service.
Yeah, sandbox as a service, right? And if let's say they are going to build that semiconductor plant here, let's say, assuming TSMC lah.
And the ecosystem.
Yeah, and because even for someone who wants TSMC to build certain things, they have to work very closely. And if they were to move that here, it becomes a very important skill transfer location. And on top of that, there will be a lot more local suppliers who can actually fit into this chain. And I think just like what you say in the Silicon Valley side, right? Originally it was Silicon Valley.
Hardware play.
Yeah, hardware play. But after that, problems start arising, and then local players start arising to solve those problems, and it grows.
Then
right?
the local hardware ecosystem, supply chain, and then
That's right.
later on became a software play.
Yeah, so maybe there could be some sort of a... Do you think that there's a possibility of some sort of an incentive, right? Where like when this kind of company comes in and they use local players, they use local employees or some sort of stuff like that, and they get certain different kind of incentive. Are there stuff like that?
I would say I wouldn't emphasize so much on the local part. I would emphasize more on the human capital and training and skills development part. And the reason why this is important is because, yes, you want to improve the local human capital level, and because they're invested in, let's say, Malaysia or Singapore or Johor, many of the beneficiaries will be Malaysians or Singaporeans.
Yeah.
But more than that, because you are emphasizing on skills development, right? You want to use this kind of ecosystem to attract the best talent from Vietnam, from Philippines, from Indonesia, who can come in to fill some of the skills gap that we're talking about now, right? And this is where you build that kind of ecosystem for them, for these talent, maybe to go back to their home countries and form an ASEAN supply chain, right? And this is something that I think we need to be more open-minded about. That we cannot just think very short term to say that we are building an ecosystem only for Malaysia. We are building an ecosystem only for Singapore, or even building an ecosystem only for Malaysia and Singapore. We should be broad-minded enough to know if, let's say, this can really spread and other areas in Southeast Asia can capitalize on it. We'll be building our own internal Southeast Asian market.
Yeah.
Right?
They should actually work with higher institution. There's UTM just down there. There's USM up there.
UTM, Skudai,
Right.
and then probably at the sort of like more technical level with some of the TVET institutions for the some of the people at the machine operator level, right? So this is part and parcel of why I think when we talk about the big numbers behind the semiconductor investments, right, we really need to think about the economic multiplier effects and who you want to work with. But because even if, let's say, the figure is big, 25 billion ringgit, China just announced their third semiconductor fund that is $48 billion US. So we are not going to be able to compete with that kind of financial muscle. So we have to be smart, we have to be nimble, we have to work with partners within the region, starting with Singapore.
Yeah, if combined together, then that's very big. Because let's not forget, Japan also is putting a lot of effort.
Japan,
in the same
Korea,
area, right? Yeah, everywhere in the world is. So we are fighting with everyone.
Correct. So the more scale we have, the more good partners we can bring onto the table, I think the more chances of success.
So we hope these benefit Malaysia economy in a great way.
Yeah. So watch this space. I'm sure we'll be talking about semiconductors in future episodes as well. Be right back. Welcome back to the final segment. Just wanted to have an update on the Malaysian Airports Holding Berhad or MAHB issue. I think that issue is still being discussed in certain quarters, although the temperature may be not that high now. I just want to point out where MAHB has granted an extension of another 22 years of the concession agreement to operate KLIA2 until 2069 to a company that is 30% owned by MAHB and 70% owned by WCT Holdings. Right? So WCT Holdings, they are the developer for KLIA2, construction company. As part and parcel of that agreement, they took on a concession agreement to operate the retail outlets and the retail space in KLIA2. The agreement was up until I think 2047 or something like that, and it's been granted another 22-year extension. This would be of interest to, let's say, people following the MAHB stock. But I thought I wanted to bring this up to discuss this issue with you, which is the fact that Khazanah as well as EPF had announced this privatization. This is something that I think it is of importance to the long-term financial well-being of MAHB. Don't you think something like this needs to have gone through a much more stringent vetting process?
Yeah. As the other party that actually stands on privatization, and I'll also be questioning actually. So I don't know whether they know or not, but yeah, so there are a few things here that because it's not like it's very near to the date you have to renew this thing immediately, right? So
Yes.
why are we in
Rushing.
such a rush?
That was one of the questions that came to me. And also the fact that you have a newly appointed chairman. The chairman, Dr. Nongsari, who is an economist by training and former MAHB chairman, was appointed on the 13th of May, 2 days before the privatization announcement. So that's one thing. So he's new to the job. And then you don't have a CEO. The CEO is still an acting CEO. Raises the question of what sort of governance processes, what sort of internal discussion and scrutiny would this extension have gone through within the context of the board? And the board comprises representatives from EPF, from Khazanah, from MOT, right? So even though this, to the larger public may not seem to be a very important announcement, but it raises all sorts of questions to me, because is it really suitable for you to make this kind of announcement of an extension in contract without a CEO, with a new chairman, and without any explanation as to why this was an extension that needed to be done? What is the rationale? Did WCT give such a great offer that that the current board couldn't resist? Is this consistent with some other form of strategy with regards to the privatization exercise, including GIP? One of the things that I thought GIP would bring to the table would be to upgrade the retail proposition, right? So then the same company that's been doing this all along gets an extension of another 22 years. I'm like, I cannot brain this.
Yeah. This
Right?
was the part that whoa. Wait, I thought you're bringing in someone to revamp the whole thing.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you wait till the whole privatization only
Exactly.
discuss about it? Now you are locking in a very long-term position.
Yes.
That's why my question is that, does GIP know?
As a member of the public that uses KLIA 2 and also KLIA, in this case, it's relevant to KLIA 2, I don't necessarily think that the current operators, this company, Segi Astana, has done a particularly great job in managing the space there. Right? I think the retail stuff that they have there is okay. It's not fantastic. A lot of the spaces, especially in some of the, the sections where after you clear the immigration, the retail space is actually quite bad. Do they have any plans to maybe even bring in some sort of connecting a hotel to the ecosystem? No, just some things to make that whole space a little bit more interesting. To use your analogy, an upgrade from the mines, so to speak.
So,
right?
might as well just use back this one and continue with it. Why privatize?
Yeah, why privatize, right? Putting aside the whole BlackRock thing and whatnot, which, there will be other people who would debate this, but probably not that big of interest for us. This is something that is much more concerning.
Right. Well, what if they were to say, this is only KLIA2?
Yeah, but KLIA2 is, how many passengers are you talking about? The passenger volume there is higher than KLIA, right? And if you want to grow the sort of budget travel market, this will be the place where you will grow.
Yeah,
and
it's an important hub.
if you have any comments about this, especially your experience with the retail space in KLIA2, please let us know in the comments. And then also, maybe this is a good time for me to also, share with you guys that we'll be having a couple of interesting guests in the near future, including, Touchwood, our first member of parliament, active member of parliament that will come here to get interviewed on this podcast. And my guess is that it will be quite an enlightening podcast, because this MP, although quite well known in certain circles, has not made any podcast appearances. Right? So I hope that he won't bail out, and that you will be able to, I'll be able to draw him behind the curtain so that you guys can benefit from the questions that I will ask him.
That's right.
And if let's say you guys have any other suggestions in terms of who we should invite, we'd be willing to hear your thoughts and views and looking to forward to more interesting interviews that we'll have on this Are We OK podcast. Any final words, Peter?
Nothing much, I guess. Stay tuned and help us to hit the like and subscribe button and share this video if you find it beneficial.
Thanks for all your support. We've gone over 20,000 subscribers, and with your support, we'll be able to produce even better content with better guests. Thank you.